Welcome to Inspirational Journeys, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our special episode where we will be talking about the Snowflake Method. I know I've talked to you guys about it before, but I can't do it justice the way our special guest can. So before I introduce him to you, I want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends, and leave a rating and review because it does help people find the show. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe, like the video, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. So I would like to welcome Randy Ingermanson to the show. Welcome to the show, Randy.
Hey, Ann, thanks for having me on today.
Thank you so much for being my special guest. So why don't you tell everyone about yourself?
In 1,000 words or less? Okay. I guess to start off, I should admit that I'm actually a theoretical physicist. So I have a PhD in physics from UC Berkeley, and I also write fiction. And so those kind of two things are kind of in tension. And so I actually use my scientific way of thinking in pretty much everything I do in my life. And when I started writing fiction years ago, it just seemed natural to me that I needed to have a nice, simple process for organizing my ideas about a novel before I wrote it, so that when I sat down to actually write, I would, have a roadmap, know where I was going. So I've published several novels over the years, and I've written them using my Snowflake method, which, to my shock and astonishment, has become wildly popular all around the world. It's not just me who likes this method, it's tens and tens of thousands of people all around the world who like it, who use it, and who have successfully written novels with it.
Wow. So yeah, and I've actually read your fiction, and it kind of shows in some of your characters where you have one of your characters is a physicist in your City of God book, which we'll talk about later. So what inspired you to become a writer?
Oh, that's a long story. I guess, in graduate school, I was studying for my, preliminary exams, which are the exams you take to make sure that you deserve to stay in, the PhD program. And just as a break from hardcore studying, 8 hours a day of intensive studying, I started reading spy novels. Okay, and I found those were really fun and interesting. And at a certain point, I just decided, you know what, I'd really like to write, a novel kind of like that, only different, but kind of like that. An exciting novel in some exotic location with interesting people who are doing things that are scary, which you wouldn't want to really do in real life because you could get killed.
Right.
So I just decided, why couldn't I write a novel? I can read after all, so that means I ought to be able to write. That's a little like saying, I can ride in a Boeing 747, so I ought to be able to fly a Boeing 747. As I discovered, it doesn't actually work that way, but I was too dumb to know that at the time, so.
Oh, sounds like something. Sounds like one of my little escapades. So, what was the inspiration behind this? The story behind the Snowflake Method?
Well, I had been writing novels set in first century Jerusalem, which is a particular interest of mine. I'd been doing research on it for a while, and I was having trouble selling those novels. And, one of the comments I got back from a particular editor was, well, these novels they don't have any modern people in them. And I'm thinking, well, that's true because it's first century Jerusalem. But I had also, recently read a time travel novel by Diana Gabaldon. It's a very famous novel, Outlander. And I thought, well, I could write a time travel novel in which I have some modern characters, which is what this editor seemed to want. And I could put them into first century Jerusalem. And then I have the best of both worlds. I mean, literally the best of both worlds. right? And so I could put modern eyes into an ancient setting and see what sort of, cultural mismatches result. And so then I asked, well, what could be the actual premise of that? I mean, you can't just have someone go back there and look around. That's boring. But I knew that in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, there's this little story. It doesn't take very long, but it's a story about 40 men who took a solemn vow. They were zealots. They took a solemn vow to eat nothing or drink nothing until they had killed the Apostle Paul. So there was an assassination attempt on the life of Paul in Jerusalem in the year probably AD 57. So I asked myself, what if some modern person who didn't like the Apostle Paul decided to travel back in time to sort of help out that effort to finish the job that these 40 zealots failed in, because they did fail. So that was sort of the starting point for my novel. And then everything else was just a matter of writing it.
Wow. Okay. So, and that was really that was interesting. But the Snowflake Method, I love how you did the story of Goldilocks and the different fairy tale characters about how she wanted to learn how to write. So what was the inspiration behind that?
Well, I had been teaching the Snowflake Method at writing conferences for years, and it was just extremely popular. And I had an article on my website at advancedfictionwriting.com for years, and that page had been visited, something like, several million times. So I knew this was an idea that was extremely popular. And I was talking to an agent friend of mine at a writing conference about how I had, once tried to get my agent interested in a book on how to write fiction using the Snowflake Method, but my agent at that time had sort of shot it down. And so that had happened some years ago when I was talking to this other agent, and he says, well, you don't have an agent anymore. Why don't you just write it on your own and see what happens? So I thought, okay, yeah, why don't I do that? I'm writing, fiction independently. I'm publishing it independently now and having some success. Why don't I write nonfiction independently and try that? And that has been also just wonderfully successful. I've had something like 50,000 people have bought my book, How to Write a Novel Using the Snowflake Method. And I've gotten just enormous numbers of emails from people who just love the book and who, are willing to put up with a very silly story about Goldilocks and three bears and an agent who's the big bad wolf. And,
I love that.
And Mrs. Hubbard, who's writing a story about a woman with a cupboard. Yes, and there's nothing there. It's just a very silly story. And some people say, well, why do you write such a silly story? I mean, you're a serious person, right? You're a physicist. How could you do that? And my answer to that is, if you know anything about memory and how people form memories, you know that the sillier something is, the easier it is to remember. And that's an old memory trick. If you just want to remember a set of numbers, you attach those numbers to some ridiculous picture in your mind. And now you remember that ridiculous picture, and it helps you to remember those numbers. And so I thought, well, I can use that. I can write a very silly fairy tale involving Goldilocks, the three bears, the big bad wolf, and teach the Snowflake Method. And it will be so dumb and so crazy and so nutty that people can't help but remember the main points. And that is pretty much the way it has worked out. Now, there's a small fraction of people who just find it dumb and stupid. And I can't say I disagree. That is what was my goal to begin with, to be something silly and stupid. And I don't mind if people think I'm stupid, because let's face it, when you escape from UC Berkeley with a PhD in physics, you stop worrying a little bit about whether you're really dumb or not. You kind of lose, you just don't worry about that anymore, because you know that you must have had a little bit of good common sense to be able to make it through that kind of a program.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure.
I don't care if people think that my story is stupid. That's maybe 2% who don't like it and who really, really just are offended at the story. But 98%, really like it. I can't help thinking that's a pretty good percentage.
Pretty good odds, yeah.
98 of 100 people are willing to put up with something zany, and that's quite funny in places, to learn some principles that will help them for the rest of their writing life. And that's what I care about. I want people to write better fiction.
You've really helped me out. I can tell you that. I've started working on my books, and I'm actually working between character profiles and scene design for one that I actually, the manuscript I finished, and I'm like, okay, so now I got to go back and work on this one to figure out what's missing in another one. But I had a friend, I'm going to tell you a story about that. I had a friend of mine who kept telling me, well, I'm trying the Snowflake Method, and I want to encourage, and she kept talking about it on our podcast, and she talked about it, in YouTube videos, and she kept telling me, well, I'm doing this character Bible, or character, she called it character sketch, about this character and that character, and it's really helping me learn about this. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. I do my bare bones plotting, I plot a little, pants a little, that kind of thing. And then she finally said, well, you might want to get the book, because even if for nothing else, you're going to get it for the story. And I encourage writers to do that all the time, because she's like, it will inspire you. And so I broke down and I ended up getting the audiobook, and I ended up reading it in one sitting.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the mystery and everything. I just could not put it down.
I find it fun to read.
It was a fun read, and the narration was just, oh my gosh! And the big bad wolf talking, James L. Rubert, Jim Rubert talking through his teeth like the big bad wolf. I'm like, oh my gosh, he sounds really.
Jim's good.
That was
he's a good
fun.
friend of mine.
That was fun. I'm actually going to read some of his books too. But so, can you tell people the different steps of the Snowflake Method, just to?
Sure. Well, I've already actually alluded to the first step, which is actually probably the most important, and that is to be able to summarize your story in one sentence. So I told you about my, how I came up with the idea for my novel Transgression, which was book 1 in my City of God series. And if I could just boil that down to one sentence, Transgression is a time travel novel set in first century Jerusalem about a rogue physicist who travels back in time to kill the Apostle Paul. Now you notice that I left an awful lot out of that sentence. I said absolutely nothing about the heroine of the story, who is a young archaeology student named Rivka. Okay, and I've left out the part about this Israeli physicist named Ari, who's sort of the love interest of Rivka. Okay, all I've told you, I've just mentioned this rogue physicist. He's the villain of the story, right? This is not a long sentence. A rogue physicist travels back in time to kill the Apostle Paul. So you might ask, well, what function does that one sentence serve? It's only 12 words. What's the value of it? The value of it is this. A large fraction of all people on the planet don't care about my story, okay? They don't care. They don't want to read about this kind of a story. So when somebody, maybe at a writing conference, or an editor or an agent, or maybe someone who's at a book signing asks me, what is your book about? And I trot out that one sentence summary. A physicist travels back in time to kill the Apostle Paul. A large fraction of them are going to go, okay, well, how about those Yankees this year? What do you think their chances are? Because they don't care. And the response I get back from people when I trot out that sentence tells me whether they don't care or if they're one of the few, the proud, the Marines who are going to love my story. Okay, so this is a sorting tool, and it's that's one very useful purpose for a one-sentence summary. But there's another one, which is I might very well start out writing that story, but I might get intrigued by some minor character who pops up in the story, and I might go off on a tangent. I don't know if that ever happens to you, but most
Oh, yeah.
writers, when they start writing, something comes into the story, it pops into their brain, and suddenly their characters are taking control of their story and zooming off in different directions, like butterflies. Now, that's not bad, but you constantly want to be have something to remind you that, okay, this is what my story started out to be. Okay, it's about a physicist traveling back in time to kill the Apostle Paul. That's what it's about. So if every day you know that that's what my story is about, if your story starts zooming too far off track, you can pull the reins on it and say, wait a second, that's not my story. I need to pull back to the main focus. Okay, now on the other hand, it might turn out that one of your characters wants to take things in a different direction, and you suddenly recognize, oh, that's a better direction than I had intended originally. That's not a problem. Okay, summarize that in one sentence, and that becomes your new one-sentence summary. And scratch out the old one. Don't throw it away. Just scratch it out and write in the new one. And that is now your new target. Yeah, see, either of those is okay. If you stick with your original plan, it's because it was a good plan. If you change it to some better plan, it's because your original plan wasn't good, but your better one is better, and that's good. And so you can evolve towards a better story by just constantly keeping your one-sentence summary in mind. So step one of the Snowflake method is to, write down one sentence that summarizes your story. It doesn't have to be perfect starting out. Do not obsess on this. Don't spend 10 years trying to figure out your one sentence summary. Give yourself an hour, write it down, read it every day as you're writing, and then move forward. Okay, so I usually, when I'm teaching about the Snowflake method, I spend a lot of time talking about this one sentence summary because it's so important. It guides everything else in your story. And it's also a marketing tool for everything you do with your book. So if you're trying to sell your book to a traditional publisher, you have to actually sell that book 7 times in order to have it achieve good sales. You first have to sell it to an acquisition editor. Typically, you do that at a conference. You meet an editor, they say, what are you writing? And you trot out your one sentence summary. You have to make the sale there or nothing else is going to happen. If that editor is not interested, you move on to the next editor until you find one who says, ooh, I like that, tell me more. Okay, and at that point, then you have to tell them more. You have to have more than just one sentence. But then they go back to their publishing house and you write up a proposal for them. And then they have to sell that to the publishing committee. And publishing committees are hostile groups of people. They shoot down typically 2/3 of the ideas that acquisitions editors bring in to the table. So your editor has to sell your idea to them. I remember one of my other novels, Oxygen, we sold it to my editor pretty much at a conference. We sat him down, my co-author and I sat him down, told him our story. And this was a hard sell because he was an editor for a Christian publishing company. And this was a hard science fiction novel about the first mission to Mars. But he sat them down. He knew they were in a killing mood for ideas that weren't, close to what they were used to doing. And he was going to give them something they had never published before. Mm-hmm. And so he told them our one sentence summary for that book. And it was like all the oxygen went out of the room. Everyone was like holding their breath going, ooh, I like that. Tell me more. Okay, that's the second stage in the sales process. Okay, but then once the publishing committee has decided that yes, we're going to publish this book, they have a sales team who actually goes out and sells it to the retailers, right? You have to sell it to them. And if they don't like the idea, they're not going to sell it hard. And the sales team has to sell it to retailers, to the buyers, who then have to, it has to be sold to bookstore owners, the people who work in the store, to readers, and your first readers have to sell it to their friends. If you miss any of those steps in the sales chain, your book is not going to do well if it's a traditionally published book. Now, if you're publishing independently, you don't have to sell to any of those, but you still do have to sell to the end reader who's browsing on Amazon and looking at summaries, and if they like that one sentence summary that you lead off your copy with, then you may make a sale. If they don't like it, then you won't. Okay, so that's a very long discussion of step one of the Snowflake method. The others are mainly just expanding on it, and this is why it's called the Snowflake method, because there's something in math called a snowflake fractal, which you create by starting with a simple triangle and then expanding it out bit by bit until you get a very complicated object that looks like a snowflake. And so the method, the snowflake method itself, starts with a simple idea. It's just, you write a one sentence summary, then you expand that to a paragraph. Okay, then you, in the third step, you would write down some very basic information about each of your characters, your major characters. In the fourth step, you would expand your one paragraph summary to a one page summary. In the fifth step, you would expand on what you've learned about your characters. Okay, in the sixth step, you would write even a longer synopsis. The seventh step, you would write even more details about your characters. And then in the eighth step, which I think is really, really important, you take your long synopsis and you turn it into a list of scenes. And each of those scenes needs to function as its own little story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So in the ninth step of it, you work out what is the beginning, the middle, and the end of each of your scenes. And then the 10th step of the snowflake is the one that's fun. That's where you actually sit down with your list of scenes and your expansion of each of those scenes into, sort of a beginning, middle, and end. And then you just write your story. And if you have done all that work, if you enjoy doing all that kind of planning work, writing the first draft of your story is a joy, right? It's fun because you know where the story is going. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to write exactly what your plan says. Your plan is like the pirate's code in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's more guidelines. It's not fixed in stone, right?
Yeah.
But it is a roadmap to get you rolling. And many people are wired to not be able to get started until they have at least some sort of a plan to know how they're going to be able to do the whole thing and finish. That's the way my brain is wired. That's the way many, many people on this planet have their brains wired. But you should understand that there are some people who, when they hear about the Snowflake method and planning it out and writing these character Bibles and the synopses and scene lists and stuff, they run away screaming, saying, I can't do that. If I do that, it's like chewing all the sugar out of the gum. Okay. I want to just start writing and write organically and let it flow. Okay. Now, those kind of people are called seat of the pants writers.
Mm-hmm.
That's not bad. It's neither bad nor good to be a planner as opposed to a seat of the pants writer. It's like, are you left-handed or are you right-handed? They're both okay. You have to do what works for you. So if planning a novel makes you want to run screaming for the razor blades, don't plan your novel. I can't emphasize this enough. Don't use the Snowflake method if it gives you the willies, if it just it makes you feel like all the joy will be gone from my writing. But if you hear the 10 steps of the Snowflake method, maybe you read my book or you read my website or you just hear me talking here and you go, whoa, that liberates me to make a plan before I write the story, then the Snowflake method probably is for you. Okay.
Okay, so I have a question because I am what they call a plantser. I plot a little, pants a little. What are your tips on using the Snowflake method for us plantsers out there?
Okay, that's very simple. Start snowflaking, right? Work at write your one sentence summary, write your one paragraph summary. Keep working on it until you're starting to feel like this is enough. I've headed up to here. I'm really dying to start writing the story. When that happens, start writing the story. Go with your joy. Go with the thing that's fun for you. Okay, and write and write and write until at a certain point you may realize, you know what? I'm lost. Things are going in 1,000 directions. I'm lost. I don't have a plan anymore. When that happens, go back and either revise your plan, the part of it that you've done so far, or move it forward a bit and keep moving it forward. Keep developing your Snowflake document until you get to the point where you're hungry again to start writing. I think it's a really powerful idea to go with the thing that gives you joy, because that's probably what your subconscious is telling you is the thing that you should be doing. Now, if your subconscious is saying, wow, the most joyful thing here would be to sit down and watch Friends all over again, all 10 seasons, okay, that's maybe not the right approach here.
Right?
Okay, I think it's a good thing to schedule time to write. Some people write 5 days a week. Some people write 7 days a week. Some people write, 2 or 3 times a week on a schedule. But it's good to have a schedule and stick to it. But it also is good to take time and fill up your creative well with other stories.
Right. I know for me, I started, I did the character, the summary and the other steps, but then when I started doing the scene list, I would write down the scenes, maybe have a couple of them ahead, then I'd write the story, then I'd go back and track the scenes that I'd already written, because it helped me keep track of the scenes, and then I go back and look and see, wait a minute, there's something missing. So I don't know if you've heard of any writers who've done that, but I think that works for me, instead of trying to
Yeah.
put all the scenes out ahead of time and then not know where the story, get a basics for where the story's going, but not know what's going to come next until you write it.
Yeah, that's completely fine. The method that is right for you is the one that works for you, the one that helps you actually get your story written. Because the goal here is not to create a brilliant blueprint of a story. The goal is to create a brilliant novel, or actually to create a first draft of a brilliant novel, because the first draft is going to look very different than the final draft. Right? So that's the whole purpose, is to produce that first draft. However you get to that first draft is fine. Use the method that works. Don't use a method that you feel uncomfortable with, that you just wears you down, it saps your energy. That's not good. That's not fun.
I love your flexibility with that too, because I think with me working the Snowflake, I think I can condense it down even a little bit further, because a lot of my character stuff I can do in the character Bible. That's just
Right.
that's just a personal take for me, honestly. But you guys do whatever works for you. Any other final tips and advice you would like to give to authors or writers out there?
Well, yeah, I have probably 10,000 things I could say, but I'll just say this.
Don't we
you're
all?
going to hear lots of advice in your life about the things that you should do. Um, use your best, use your instincts to decide which of those things are things that you're actually going to do. Because, Stephen King is a very good novelist. He is a seat of the pants writer. Okay. But there are many writers. Robert Ludlum was a classic example of a guy who loved to outline things. So he would write 100-page outline for a 500-page novel. Okay, so Stephen King and Robert Ludlum had very, very different methodologies. They were each following the method that worked for them. If somebody tells you you should be doing this and that just does not feel right, it just rings false to you, then it is false for you, right? There's many roads to writing nirvana, and you have to find the road that you can actually walk on. Okay.
Oh, okay. So I'm curious now, the story that Goldilocks actually snowflaked and started writing, was that actually one that you created, or was it something that was just used as an example? Because I'm curious, because you got me interested in that too.
That is an interesting story, isn't it?
Yes.
It sounds like something that Ken Follett would write, or maybe Jack Higgins, but as far as I know, nobody has ever written that particular story. I had to have an example. So as I was writing the novel, I snowflaked Goldilocks's story for her in exactly the way that you see it develop on the page. That is, I did not, map things out. I just knew at the beginning, okay, Goldilocks wants to write a sort of a romantic suspense kind of a novel, and she likes World War II. So just as I was writing the story, and Baby Bear asks Goldilocks, "What's your story about?" I sort of worked through that right along with Goldilocks. And as the story expanded and grew, I was surprised, when we find that the villain of the story might conceivably find redemption. That was a surprise to me, but it sort of naturally developed because I was writing, this snowflake for Goldilocks. And so, maybe someday I will write that story.
I
Although
wonder, because now I want to.
I don't know
read
that much about World War II. Maybe I could find a ghostwriter who is a World War II expert to write, or a co-author or something.
Yeah, but I'd love to read the rest of that now.
it's way off brand for me, so I probably will never write that. But yeah, I would love to read that story.
Oh, me too. Trust me.
I'm a big fan of some of the guys I just mentioned, Ken Follett, Jack Higgins, some of these guys that write World War II thrillers. Always enjoyed that. But I don't know enough about World War II to write that myself.
Yeah, but it was really fun. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? Because not only I'm working on a Christian romantic, a supernatural romantic suspense with Christian elements, but I'm also working on a Christian psychological thriller with supernatural elements. So yeah, that was kind of right up my alley. So what are you currently working on now?
Well, I am working on book 2 in my Crown of Thorns series. So this is a 4-book series about the life and death and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, and I've published book 1 about a year ago. I'm working on book 2. I just heard back from my editor with suggestions for revisions. So I'm going to be using the Snowflake method to analyze all of her comments and figure out how to rewrite the story to make it the story that it needs to be, because it's not good enough yet. It's just a first draft. First drafts are never what they need to be.
No.
So that's going to take me several months, but I'll get there. I'll have a plan, because I'll build a plan using the Snowflake method.
And I'm curious, do you know whether any of your novels will be released in audio or just in ebook and print?
Those are all up to me. It's a matter of finding the time to, sit down with a narrator. Mostly the narrator does most of the work on that, but of course I have to spend time then listening to the the narration at least twice and stopping it, stopping the audio and taking notes on any glitches and things. And that is quite time consuming, even for the Snowflake book. It took a bit more time than I was expecting to do that. So we all have limited amounts of time. I have a day job that consumes half my life. Like most authors have a day job. I have one that is demanding, but I schedule time to write every day. And so I'll get there, but it's just not, it doesn't happen as fast as I would like.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know if it was going to be up to you or up to your publisher.
Yeah, it's up to me. I am my publisher now. I've stopped working with traditional publishers because, honestly, I feel like I do better financially and just psychologically, not having someone holding a deadline over my head and then, taking 80% of the money that comes in as revenues from the book.
Yeah, you get higher royalties self-published.
Yeah. So just different authors are different. I prefer the freedom of, controlling my own publishing life.
Right. So where can people find you online?
Okay, if you're interested in learning how to write a novel, I have a website at advancedfictionwriting.com, or you can just Google Snowflake Method and follow your nose. And so I also have my personal website that's about my fiction only at Ingermanson.com. That's my last name, INGERMANSON.com. And so depending on what people are interested in, they can go to one or both of those sites.
Okay. So I do ask a lot of the Christian authors that I talk to, and if you feel uncomfortable, let me know. But do you have a verse that a Bible verse that you'd like to share?
I don't really. The Bible is a big and complicated book, and I've studied it intensively, but I'm not just the kind of person to grab a verse and hold on to it. I like to think in bigger chunks than that.
Oh, okay.
So, for the last several years, I've been intensively reading the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Every few months, I'll just sit down and read through all of them again to make sure that I'm staying on track with my story. Because, if you're writing a novel about Jesus, you have to stay close to the sources. But as we all know, those sources, they had no intention to tell the story exactly in order. Right? That was just not their plan. These are not history books, and so the events in Mark are not the same as, are not ordered the same as the events in Matthew or Luke or John. They all tell somewhat different orderings of the story, and they all have their different perspectives. So it's challenging to try to figure out what order am I going to write the events in, because I can't show all four orders.
Right. Exactly. And the Bible is not written in chronological order either.
Right. And it's not written in English, so which complicates things. It's written in Greek about people who spoke Aramaic. So there's two levels of translation going on there. And that makes things complicated.
Oh, I bet it does, because that makes for a lot of research.
Yeah.
So would you like to close us out in prayer?
I'm not the kind of person who likes to pray in public. I like to do mine in private, but that's just one of those oddities about me.
Oh, well, that's fine. That's, to each his own.
Yeah.
Well, so we challenge you today to go out there and read to get inspired, write something inspiring, and share your creation with the world. For when you've touched one life, you've touched thousands. Thanks for joining us on Inspirational Journeys, and have a blessed day.